When a newly hired maid started her job at one of the city's grandest mansions, she couldn't ignore the gnawing tension that simmered between the millionaire and his wife day after day. A few days in, she noticed how the wife stayed confined within the towering walls of their sprawling home, never once crossing the mansion's gates, until, by sheer chance, she stumbled upon the chilling truth behind why the woman always draped herself in dresses that hid her neck. In that heartbeat, the maid realized she had to act fast before everything spiraled into something darker. You're catching this today, and if these tales grip you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Elena signed on as a maid at the Blackwood Estate, a sprawling, opulent mansion tucked away in the lonely woods outside London. The man of the house, Nathan Blackwood, was a financial titan swimming in wealth. Nearly 3 months into the gig, Elena had yet to catch a single glimpse of his wife Isabella, stepping out of her secluded room. At first, it didn't faze her. Maybe Isabella just craved solitude. But the longer she lingered in that house, the more an eerie unease crept into her bones. Each day, she'd carry meals to Isabella's door, tap 3 soft knocks as ordered, and slip away without ever laying eyes on her. Another maid handled all her clothes and things. The windows in that room bolted shut, always. One afternoon, while dusting Nathan's study, Elena caught a snatch of a hushed phone call. "I said no one sees her. If she pieces it all back together, we're finished." Nathan's voice rumbled low, laced with a threat that made Elena's skin prickle. Pieces what together? That night, a wild storm tore through the forest. As she checked the windows, a strange sound drifted from Isabella's room. For the first time, Elena threw caution aside. Her fingers brushed the doorknob, gave it a twist. It wasn't locked. She eased the door open and stepped in. The room swallowed her in darkness, save for a sliver of moonlight sneaking through the curtains. There in the center, a woman with long raven black hair sat motionless by the window. "Who's there?" Isabella's voice quivered, fragile as glass. Elena edged closer, her heart pounding in her chest. As the light fell across Isabella's face, she sucked in a sharp breath. The woman before her was pale, gaunt, but what froze Elena in terror was the faint scar etched across her forehead. Are you okay?" Elena whispered. Isabella lifted her head, her hollow eyes suddenly flickering with a spark of awareness. I don't remember. Have I ever left this place?" The question sent a shiver racing down Elena's spine. From outside, the sound of footsteps echoed. The door swung open. Nathan Blackwood stood there, his gaze dark and unyielding. "You've seen too much, Elena." Elena froze, her heart seeming to stop as Nathan Blackwood's piercing stare pinned her in place. The air in the room thickened, suffocating, the howling whine through the window cracks mingling with her ragged breaths. Isabella flinched slightly, her trembling hands clutching the armrest, as if awakening from a long, unbroken dream. I just wanted to check if she was all right," Elena stammered, fighting to steady her voice despite the fear surging within her. "The storm, it worried me." Nathan stepped into the room, each footfall a silent warning. The light from the hallway spilled across his face, sharpening the rigid lines and those emotionless eyes. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if weighing whether she was truly naive or hiding something deeper. "Worried?" he repeated, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, yet laced with mockery. "You're not paid to worry, Elena. You're paid to work and follow the rules." He paused, turning to Isabella. The dark-haired woman dipped her head, her frail hands clenching together in her lap. She looked like a bird trapped in a cage, fragile, desperate. Nathan reached out, brushing her hair with a touch that seemed gentle but sent a chill crawling up Elena's skin. "Get out," he commanded, not looking at her. "And don't ever come back here." Elena wanted to push back, to demand what was happening to Isabella, but Nathan's gaze made it clear that any word she uttered now would be a fatal misstep. She nodded stiffly, retreating step by step from the room. As the door clicked shut behind her, she heard the sharp snap of the bolt sliding into place, a dry, final sound that nailed her curiosity shut. That night, sleep eluded Elena. The image of Isabella's pallid face, the faint scar on her forehead, and that haunting question, "Have I ever left this place?" looped endlessly in her mind. Was Isabella being held against her will? Or was she hiding from something? And Nathan, what secret was he burying? The next morning, Elena made up her mind to dig deeper. She couldn't keep working in this house without knowing the truth. During the lunch break, while the other maids bustled in the kitchen, she slipped into the library, a room Nathan had forbidden anyone from entering unless explicitly ordered otherwise. The space was vast, thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, but what caught Elena's eye was a small, locked wooden box on the desk. She brushed her fingers over it, her heart hammering. Beside it lay a messy stack of papers, and an old photograph slipped free. In the picture, Nathan stood beside a young woman, Isabella, but a version so unlike the one she'd just seen. This Isabella glowed, her eyes sparkling with life, no trace of a scar on her forehead. The date scrawled on the back was over 10 years ago. Before Elena could process it, a sound jolted her, the rattle of keys at the main door. She shoved the photo into her pocket, darted out of the library, and slipped back into her routine as if nothing had happened. But in her head, questions piled up like storm clouds. Who had Isabella been? What had turned her into a shadow of herself? And more pressing still, what would Nathan do if he knew she was prying into his past? That evening, as she prepared to leave the mansion, an older maid named Martha pulled her into a shadowed corner near the kitchen. The old woman's face was creased with lines, her eyes glinting with worry. "You shouldn't poke around," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "The ones who ask too much, they're not here anymore." Before Elena could respond, Martha pressed a crumpled scrap of paper into her hand and hurried off. Elena unfolded it, and the scrawled words sent ice flooding through her veins. "Isabella isn't his wife." The words on that scrap hit her like a jolt of cold lightning. Not his wife. Then who was she? And if she wasn't his wife, why had Nathan kept her locked away all these years? Elena gripped the paper tight, her heart racing wildly. She couldn't just ignore this truth. If Martha had risked giving her this warning, it meant she knew more than she dared to say. But how could Elena approach Martha again without rousing Nathan's suspicions? That night, Elena tossed and turned in bed, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Finally, as the clock edged toward 4 in the morning, she made her choice. She had to find a way to speak to Isabella alone. The next morning, Elena watched everyone in the mansion closely. Nathan left early for an important meeting. This was her only shot. She grabbed a tea tray and pretended to bring it to Isabella's room as usual. But this time, instead of leaving after setting it down by the door, she gently pushed it open and stepped inside. Isabella was still by the window, just as she'd been the night before, but now she seemed more alert. When she saw Elena, she flinched, her fearful eyes locking onto her. "I don't have much time," Elena whispered, setting the tray on the table. "You're not Nathan's wife, are you?" Isabella froze, her hands clutching the blanket draped over her lap. A terrifying silence swallowed the room. Then, slowly, she nodded. Elena drew a deep breath, fighting to stay calm. "Then who are you? And why is he keeping you here?" Isabella's voice was faint, like a breeze slipping through cracks. "I don't remember everything, but I know one thing for sure. I had another family once. Another name. Nathan, he plucked me out of that life." A shiver raced down Elena's spine. "Do you want to escape?" Isabella's eyes flickered with a fragile spark of hope. But just as she opened her mouth to answer, a sound echoed from the hallway. Someone was coming. Elena stepped back quickly, but Isabella suddenly grabbed her hand, her voice urgent. "Please, don't let him find out you know." The door burst open. Elena spun around, facing the icy stare of one of Nathan's guards. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone thick with suspicion. Elena forced a fragile smile, struggling to keep her composure. She spilled the tea. "I was just helping clean it up." The guard stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Get out. And next time, finish your job and leave immediately." Elena nodded, hurrying from the room. But inside, she knew, there was no turning back now. She had to help Isabella escape. Before it was too late. She moved swiftly down the long hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. She clutched the crumpled note tighter, her mind a tangle of thoughts about Martha's message. If Isabella wasn't Nathan Blackwood's wife, then who was she really? And why was he keeping her captive in this mansion? She knew time was running out. If she wanted to help Isabella flee, it had to be tonight. Back in her room, Elena shut the door and leaned against it to steady herself. She needed a plan. First, she had to find the safest way out. The front door was always guarded, the windows barred with iron. But the basement. Yes, she remembered seeing a door down there leading to the garden. If she could get Isabella to it unnoticed, they might have a chance to run. Elena took a deep breath and cautiously opened her wardrobe, pulling out another maid's uniform. She rummaged through a drawer, finding a spare key she'd swiped from the housekeeper's room weeks ago, just in case. She slipped it into her pocket, turned off the light, and sat silently, waiting for midnight. When the clock struck 2 a.m., Elena eased her door open and slipped into the hallway. The mansion was cloaked in darkness, save for the faint yellow glow spilling from the main corridor. She moved carefully, pressing herself against the wall to muffle the sound of her shoes on the wooden floor. At Isabella's door, Elena paused, listening. No sound came from within. She turned the knob, it was still unlocked. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Isabella's silhouette remained by the window, her vacant eyes gazing out into the night. "Mrs. Isabella," Elena whispered. "We have to leave now." Isabella blinked, as if Elena had just roused her from a dreamlike trance. "Leave? To where?" "Anywhere but here." Elena knelt, grasping her hands. "You don't remember anything, do you? But I know one thing, you don't belong here. Nathan Blackwood is holding you captive. I don't know why, but you have to trust me." Isabella trembled. A flicker of hesitation crossed her eyes, but then she gave a faint nod. "How do we get out?" "Follow me. Try not to make a sound." Elena helped Isabella to her feet, realizing she was even frilier than she'd thought. They stepped into the hallway, moving silently toward the stairs. But just as they neared the basement entrance, a sound froze them in place, the heavy thud of boots on the wooden floor. Someone was coming. Elena yanked Isabella into a shadowed corner, holding her breath. A figure emerged at the end of the hall. It was Nathan Blackwood. He stood still for a moment, as if sensing something amiss. Elena gripped Isabella's hand tighter, feeling her tremble. If Nathan spotted them, it would all end right here. But after a tense pause, he turned and strode toward his study. When he vanished from sight, Elena let out a shaky breath. "Hurry," she whispered, pulling Isabella along. They descended into the basement, and Elena used the key to unlock the small door leading to the back garden. The night air was frigid, but freedom lay just ahead. If they could get past the gate, they might reach the nearest village. But as they stepped outside, a low, guttural voice cut through the darkness. "I told you, Elena. You've seen too much." Elena instinctively tightened her grip on Isabella, her breath catching in her throat. Before them stood Nathan Blackwood, his towering silhouette framed by the dim glow of the porch light. His cold, piercing eyes glinted with menace, a faint, twisted smile stretching across his lips as if he'd been anticipating this moment all along. Behind him, two towering guards stepped forward slowly, blocking their only way out. Elena fought to stay calm. She couldn't let fear take over now. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, forcing her voice to sound steady. "I was just taking Mrs. Isabella outside for some fresh air." Nathan's lips curled into a sneer, his gaze sliding over Isabella, who trembled in Elena's grasp. "Is that so?" "Isabella," his voice was low but sharp as a blade. "Are you planning to go somewhere?" Isabella didn't answer right away. She took a step back, her hand clutching Elena's like it was her lifeline. But then, to Elena's astonishment, Isabella lifted her head. Her eyes, still shadowed with fear, flashed with a spark of defiance. "Yes," Isabella whispered. Then she said it again, her voice stronger this time. "I want to leave, Nathan." A deadly silence fell. Nathan's face twisted into something more terrifying than ever before. Gone was the mask of calm control, the faint smile of dominance. His eyes blazed with fury, and when he spoke, his voice hissed through clenched teeth. "Have you forgotten? You have nowhere to go." Isabella trembled, but this time she didn't back down. "No," she said, her voice wavering yet resolute. "I remember." Elena's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "Remember." She turned to Isabella and saw it, the shift in her eyes. They were no longer the vacant stare of a prisoner locked away for years, but the gaze of someone who had just reclaimed herself. Nathan saw it too. "Impossible," he muttered, his eyes widening in shock. Suddenly, Isabella let go of Elena's hand and took a step toward Nathan. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You manipulated me, made me believe I was your wife. But I remember now, Nathan. I remember who I am." Nathan's face stiffened. "What are you talking about?" Isabella stared him down. "I'm Isabella Laurent, not Isabella Blackwood. And I never married you." Elena's jaw dropped. Laurent. That name sounded so familiar. And then it hit her. The Laurent family, one of England's wealthiest and most powerful dynasties, had lost an heir in a mysterious accident 10 years ago. An accident where no body was ever found. Elena's heart raced. Was Isabella Laurent that missing heir? Nathan let out a low, humorless laugh, but the calm was gone from his demeanor. "So what?" His voice cut through the air, cold as ice. "You think you can just walk away?" Isabella clenched her fists, but before she could respond, Nathan flicked his hand. "Take them." The two guards lunged forward. Elena didn't have time to think. She yanked Isabella back into the house, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps thundered closer. They didn't have much time. Elena dragged Isabella through the dark hallway, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. The footsteps behind them grew louder, closer. She knew they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. "Isabella, is there another way out of here?" she asked, her voice urgent. Isabella shook her head, but then a spark of hope flashed in her eyes. "There's a tunnel," she said quickly. "It leads to the forest. But I don't remember exactly where the entrance is. We have to try." Elena cut in, tightening her grip on Isabella's hand. Both of them bolted toward the door at the end of the hallway, the library. The heavy door slammed shut just as they slipped inside. Outside, Nathan's voice rang out. "Do you really think you can escape?" Elena didn't answer. She frantically searched the room, desperate for any clue to the tunnel's entrance. Isabella whispered, as if piecing together a memory. "The bookshelf. There has to be a mechanism." At that moment, Elena noticed a book jutting out slightly from the others. Without hesitation, she yanked it hard. Boom! A section of the bookshelf creaked and swung open, revealing a pitch-black passage behind it. "Let's go!" Elena pulled Isabella inside. Just as they disappeared behind the wall, the library door burst open. "Seal every exit," Nathan barked, his voice seething with rage. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with the stench of earth and rotting wood. Isabella's breaths came in ragged gasps, but she pressed on. "Are we almost there?" Elena asked, fighting to stay calm. "Almost," Isabella replied, her voice trembling. "I remember, near the end of the tunnel, there's an iron door." Crash! A loud bang from behind made them both jump. Time was running out. Elena grabbed Isabella's arm, urging her to run faster. At last, they reached an old, rusted iron door. Isabella shoved against it with trembling hands, but it wouldn't budge. "It won't open," she cried, panic overtaking her. Elena glanced around, desperate. Then she spotted a latch beside the door. She twisted it hard. Click! The door sprang open. They burst outside, breaths heaving. Before them stretched the pitch-black forest, the wind howling through the treetops. Behind them, footsteps echoed closer. "Run!" Elena shouted. They tore through the woods, breaths ragged. Branches whipped against their skin, but neither stopped. Shouts rang out behind them. Nathan wasn't giving up. "There's a road ahead," Isabella gasped, pointing. Elena followed her gaze. Sure enough, a dirt path snaked out of the forest. But at that moment, a gunshot cracked through the air. Bang! Elena flinched, spinning around. Nathan stood not far off, a pistol in his hand. "The game's over," he snarled. Isabella stepped back, fear flashing in her eyes. But this time, she didn't flee. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Nathan," she said, her voice steady. Nathan smirked. "Is that so?" He raised the gun. Bang! But the shot didn't come from Nathan's weapon. Nathan froze, his eyes widening in shock. A dark stain of blood spread across his shirt. Behind him stood Martha, the old maid, her trembling hands clutching a gun. "Enough, Nathan," she said, her voice breaking. "You've done enough." Nathan staggered, then crumpled to the ground. Isabella stared at him, her eyes brimming with a flood of emotions. At last, the nightmare was over. 2 weeks later, Elena sat by the window of a small London cafe. Isabella had reunited with the Laurent family. She was safe now. Martha had confessed everything to the police, revealing all she knew about Nathan. It was finally over. But Elena knew she'd never forget her time at the Blackwood mansion. The mystery, the fear, the courage, it had changed her forever. She took a sip of her coffee, gazing out at the bustling street. Sometimes, the truth lies buried. But there are always those willing to dig it up. And she'd probably always be one of them.